At exactly 6:42 p.m., when the sun hung low and neighbors were settling into the quiet comfort of their evening routines, a single scream shattered the calm of Maplewood Lane, a scream that would expose entitlement, obsession, and a shocking crime no one saw coming. What began as a woman peering over a fence would soon escalate into flashing police lights, viral footage, and an arrest that stunned an entire neighborhood watching in disbelief. Maplewood Lane was known for two things: trimmed hedges and unspoken competition. Lawns were measured by neatness, driveways by shine, and children's laughter by volume complaints. In the center of it all lived Sarah Miller, a single mother who worked long hours and saved every spare dollar for her 8-year-old son, Lucas. That afternoon, she had surprised him with a backyard setup he'd been dreaming about for months. Brightly colored toy blasters, foam darts scattered like confetti, and a small inflatable obstacle course transformed their modest yard into a miniature adventure zone. Lucas's joy was impossible to miss. He ran, laughed, and shouted, his happiness echoing down the street. For most neighbors, it was harmless fun. For one woman, it was a problem demanding immediate action. Across the street stood Brenda Whitmore, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes narrowed with purpose. Brenda was self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, a woman who believed rules mattered more than context and authority belonged to whoever shouted loudest. From her porch, she watched Lucas play, convinced she was witnessing something far more sinister than toys. Brenda's mind raced. Toy guns meant violence. Violence meant danger. Danger meant she had a duty to intervene. She didn't knock. She didn't ask questions. She didn't call City Hall. Instead, she marched straight toward Sarah's property, phone in hand, recording as she went. When Sarah stepped inside briefly to grab water, Brenda seized her chance. She opened the side gate and stepped into the yard without permission, camera rolling, narrating loudly about illegal weapons and endangered children. Lucas froze, confused and scared, as a stranger towered over him, inspecting his toys like evidence at a crime scene. That was the moment everything changed. Sarah rushed back outside, shocked to find a woman trespassing, accusing, filming, and refusing to leave. Voices rose. Neighbors gathered. Brenda claimed she was enforcing the law. Sarah demanded she get out. Then sirens approached. Not for Sarah, not for Lucas, but for Brenda. The truth would unravel fast, and the consequences would be unforgettable. The patrol cars rolled in slowly, tires crunching against the gravel as curious neighbors stepped onto porches, phones already raised, sensing something worth recording. Brenda's voice, once sharp with authority, wavered when she realized the flashing lights were stopping in front of Sarah's house, not driving past it. She straightened her posture anyway, convinced she was about to be praised for her vigilance, not questioned for her actions. Officer Daniels stepped out first, calm and deliberate, scanning the scene before speaking. He saw a shaken child clutching foam darts, a distressed mother standing between her son and a stranger, and Brenda, still filming, narrating dramatically about illegal toys and public safety violations. Officer Daniels asked a simple question that instantly disrupted Brenda's confidence. "Ma'am, do you live at this address?" Brenda hesitated, then answered no, explaining she lived across the street and was just doing her civic duty. The second officer, Officer Ramirez, quietly walked toward the open gate, noting it had been unlatched from the outside. He asked Brenda why she was inside a private yard. Without permission. Brenda scoffed, insisting that when laws were being broken, permission didn't matter. Sarah finally found her voice, hands trembling as she explained everything. She described her son's birthday surprise, the toys, and the moment she returned to find Brenda standing over Lucas, recording him and accusing them of criminal behavior. Lucas clung to her leg, eyes fixed on the officers, afraid he was the one in trouble. Officer Daniels crouched down to Lucas's level and gently asked about the toys. Lucas explained they were foam blasters, bought at a local store, used only for play. Officer Daniels nodded, already knowing the answer. Foam toys were legal, always had been. When Officer Ramirez asked Brenda to stop recording and step out of the yard, she refused. Her voice rose again, louder now, accusing the officers of ignoring danger and siding with irresponsible parents. She waved her phone inches from Officer Daniels's face, insisting she had rights and demanding their badge numbers. That refusal changed everything. Officer Daniels warned her once. Trespassing, harassment, disorderly conduct. Brenda laughed, confident her certainty made her untouchable. When she tried to push past the officer to continue inspecting the toys, Officer Ramirez gently but firmly took her arm. The cuffs clicked shut. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brenda shouted in disbelief as her phone slipped from her hand, still recording the moment her imagined authority finally collapsed under real law. Brenda's disbelief echoed down Maplewood Lane as the officers guided her toward the patrol car, her earlier confidence dissolving into frantic protests. She demanded explanations, cited imaginary regulations, and insisted she was the victim of an injustice. To her, this wasn't an arrest, it was a misunderstanding that would surely be cleared up the moment someone important arrived. But no one important came. Only neighbors, watching silently as the scene unfolded. Sarah held Lucas close, her heart pounding as reality settled in. Just minutes earlier, her biggest concern had been keeping foam darts from clogging the lawn mower. Now she was comforting her son after a stranger had invaded their safe space. Officer Daniels returned to them, speaking gently, assuring Lucas he hadn't done anything wrong. Those words mattered more than any apology could. Across the street, whispers spread quickly. Phones recorded from multiple angles, capturing Brenda's angry monologue as she was seated in the back of the car. Some neighbors shook their heads, others exchanged knowing looks. Brenda's reputation had preceded her. She was known for reporting chalk drawings as graffiti, birthday balloons as visual clutter, and lawn ornaments as code violations. This time, though, she had gone too far. Officer Ramirez retrieved Brenda's phone from the ground, careful to preserve whatever footage it contained. He informed her calmly that the recording would be reviewed as part of the incident. Brenda protested again, claiming her video proved everything. She didn't realize it also captured her opening the gate, stepping inside without consent, and intimidating a child. The evidence was clearer than she imagined. As the car door closed, a strange silence fell over the street. The spectacle was over, but the impact lingered. Sarah thanked the officers repeatedly, her voice still shaky. They provided her with a case number and explained she could press additional charges if she chose. Trespassing alone was enough. Harassment made it worse. Filming a minor without parental consent sealed it. Lucas finally spoke, asking a question that cut through the tension. Is she going to come back? Sarah paused, then answered honestly, saying no, not today, and probably not ever. Officer Daniels smiled softly and told Lucas his yard was still his, and his toys were still toys, nothing more. As the patrol cars pulled away, neighbors slowly dispersed, the evening returning to something resembling normal. But for Brenda, normal was gone. A single decision, driven by entitlement and obsession, had turned her into the very problem she claimed to be stopping. And the consequences were only beginning. The next morning, Maplewood Lane woke up to a different kind of noise. It wasn't laughter or lawn equipment or passing cars. It was the buzz of notifications. Overnight, the videos recorded by neighbors had spread beyond the block, jumping from private group chats to public feeds. By sunrise, Brenda's arrest was no longer just a neighborhood incident. It was a story. Sarah discovered it accidentally while packing Lucas's lunch. A message from a coworker popped up with a link and a simple question: "Is this your street?" Her stomach dropped as she watched a clip showing Brenda storming into the yard, narrating angrily, then shouting as officers placed her in handcuffs. The comments scrolled endlessly, filled with disbelief, sarcasm, and anger. Strangers debated laws, parenting, and entitlement, but nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Brenda had crossed a line. Lucas noticed the change immediately. Sarah was quieter, more distracted. She reassured him again that he was safe, that no one was angry at him, and that the toys were staying. Still, the innocence of the previous day felt fragile. A yard that once felt like a fortress now seemed exposed. Across town, Brenda sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. Her face, her voice, her outrage, all online. Friends she expected to support her stayed silent. Some blocked her, others sent messages she couldn't bring herself to open. She replayed the footage repeatedly, convinced viewers were misunderstanding her intentions. She wasn't a villain. She was trying to protect the neighborhood. That belief clung to her, even as everything around it crumbled. By midday, A local news station called Sarah, asking for comment. She declined politely, choosing privacy over attention. She didn't want fame or validation. She wanted peace. The station aired the footage anyway, blurred faces and all, framing the story as a cautionary tale about boundaries and escalation. Brenda's name wasn't mentioned, but her image was unmistakable. That afternoon, a city code enforcement officer stopped by Sarah's home. Not to issue citations, but to apologize. Complaints had been filed in the past, mostly from one source. The officer explained that foam toys were legal, safe, and common. There were no violations. There never had been. As the sun dipped again, Sarah and Lucas returned to the backyard. They didn't play at first. They just stood there, reclaiming the space. Slowly, Lucas picked up a foam blaster. Then another. Laughter returned, tentative but real. Across the street, Brenda's curtains stayed closed. By the end of the week, the legal consequences Brenda had brushed off as temporary inconvenience began to take shape in ways she could no longer ignore. A formal notice arrived by certified mail, thick with official language and stamped warnings. Trespassing, harassment, disorderly conduct. Each word felt heavier than the last, not because she believed she was wrong, but because the system had dared to treat her like everyone else. Brenda called her sister first, expecting sympathy. Instead, she was met with silence, then disappointment. The video had reached family members too. They had seen the gate open, heard the accusations, watched the arrest. For the first time, Brenda couldn't control the narrative. No amount of explaining about standards or safety erased the image of a grown woman intimidating a child in his own yard. At the courthouse, Brenda sat stiffly on a wooden bench, arms crossed, foot tapping in frustration. The room was filled with quiet murmurs, people waiting for their own cases to be called. When her name echoed through the hall, her confidence flickered. The judge listened patiently as the prosecutor summarized the incident, referencing video evidence, witness statements, and prior complaints made by Brenda against multiple neighbors. When it was her turn to speak, Brenda launched into a familiar speech. She claimed fear, concern, duty. She insisted the toys looked dangerous and that she believed a crime was being committed. The judge asked one question that cut through everything. Did you have permission to enter the property? Brenda paused too long. The judge's ruling was calm but firm. Ignorance of the law was not an excuse. Personal beliefs did not override private property rights. Filming a minor without consent, especially while trespassing, was serious. Brenda was fined, ordered to complete community service, and issued a strict no-contact order with Sarah and her family. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but Brenda walked past them, eyes forward, jaw clenched. Her name might not have been spoken aloud, but the damage was done. Back on Maplewood Lane, the atmosphere shifted again. Neighbors who had once avoided conflict now spoke openly. Boundaries were discussed. Support for Sarah was vocal and visible. One afternoon, a small package appeared on Sarah's porch. Inside was a handwritten card from a neighbor she barely knew, thanking her for standing her ground. Others followed. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. Lucas noticed too. He stood taller, laughed louder, and stopped glancing nervously at the fence. Brenda watched all of this from behind closed blinds, finally realizing that authority taken, rather than earned, always comes at a cost. Weeks passed, and while the headlines faded, the emotional aftershocks settled into quieter, deeper places. Maplewood Lane returned to its routines, but something had shifted beneath the surface. People smiled more openly, waved longer, and spoke up sooner when something felt wrong. The unspoken rule of silence had been broken, and it wasn't missed. Sarah felt the change most clearly in herself. For years, she had kept her head down, careful not to draw attention, believing peace came from staying unnoticed. Brenda's intrusion shattered that belief. Standing up for her son had been terrifying, but it had also been empowering. She realized safety didn't come from silence. It came from boundaries. Lucas started sleeping through the night again. The questions stopped. The fear faded. One Saturday afternoon, he invited two friends over, and the backyard filled with laughter once more. Foam darts flew, imaginary missions were shouted, and childhood reclaimed its rightful space. Sarah watched from the porch, sunlight warming her face, knowing she had protected more than toys. She had protected his sense of home. Brenda's world, however, continued to shrink. Community service placed her in a public park, cleaning benches and picking up litter while families passed by. Some recognized her, some whispered, most ignored her entirely. That indifference hurt more than judgment. Authority meant nothing when no one listened. During one long afternoon, Brenda overheard children playing nearby, their toy blasters unmistakable. She tensed instinctively, then paused. No one panicked. No one called the police. Parents laughed. The world continued without her interference. For the first time, she wondered if she had been fighting problems that never truly existed. That thought unsettled her more than any fine or court order. If she hadn't been protecting others, then what had she been doing? Control, once disguised as concern, revealed itself in uncomfortable clarity. Brenda finished her assigned hours quietly, without complaint, avoiding eye contact, following rules she once believed didn't apply to her. Back on Maplewood Lane, a small sign appeared near Sarah's fence. It wasn't aggressive or defensive. It simply read, "Private property. Please respect our space." Neighbors nodded approvingly. No one objected. One evening, as the sun dipped low again, Sarah and Lucas sat together, watching shadows stretch across the yard. The memory of that scream lingered, but it no longer defined them. What defined them now was resilience, community, and the simple power of saying no. Some lessons arrive loudly, others echo forever. Autumn arrived gently on Maplewood Lane, bringing cooler air and a sense of quiet renewal. Leaves gathered along curbs, and the neighborhood seemed to breathe out after weeks of tension. With distance came reflection, and reflection brought conversations that had never happened before. People talked about boundaries, about assumptions, about how quickly fear could masquerade as responsibility. Sarah noticed how often neighbors stopped her now, not to complain, but to connect. One asked how Lucas was doing. Another apologized for not speaking up sooner. None of them had meant harm, but many admitted they had stayed silent because confronting Brenda felt exhausting. Watching someone else draw a line had given them permission to do the same. Lucas started school again with a confidence that surprised his teachers. When a classmate teased him about the video, he shrugged and said, "She wasn't allowed in our yard." That simple sentence carried more strength than anyone expected. It wasn't defensive or angry. It was factual. The truth had become enough. Brenda, meanwhile, faced consequences that couldn't be measured by fines or hours served. Invitations stopped arriving. Neighborhood emails no longer included her. The power she once felt came from being watched and feared. Now she was simply unseen. Isolation settled in, heavy and undeniable. One afternoon, Brenda stood at her window as children rode bikes past her house, laughter echoing down the street. For years, she had believed order came from control. Now she saw something else entirely. Order came from trust, from mutual respect, from knowing when to step back. The realization was uncomfortable, but it lingered. At a community meeting held weeks later, attendance was higher than ever. Sarah spoke briefly, her voice steady, not accusatory. She talked about safety, about respect, and about remembering that rules were meant to protect people, not police joy. Applause followed, not loud, but sincere. Brenda sat in the back, unnoticed at first. She didn't speak. She listened. Each word landed differently now. When the meeting ended, she left quietly, but not unchanged. The certainty that once fueled her actions had been replaced by doubt, and doubt, for the first time, made space for growth. That evening, Sarah tucked Lucas into bed and listened as he recounted his day, full of small triumphs and simple joys. The yard, the toys, the fear, all felt distant now, like a story that belonged to someone else. But stories don't disappear. They teach, and the lessons learned on Maplewood Lane would shape its people long after the leaves were cleared and the fences stood silent again. Winter crept in slowly, frosting Maplewood Lane with quiet mornings and shorter days. The yard that once echoed with laughter now rested under a thin layer of frost, toys packed away, waiting for spring. Yet even in the stillness, the story lingered, passed quietly between neighbors like a shared understanding that something important had changed. Sarah felt it during small moments. At the grocery store, a stranger recognized her and simply said, "You did the right thing." At school events, Parents stood a little closer, more willing to intervene when something felt off. The unspoken tolerance for intimidation had thinned, replaced by a quiet confidence that boundaries mattered. Lucas carried that confidence too. During show and tell, he brought one of his foam blasters, carefully explaining how it worked and how it was meant for play, not harm. His teacher smiled, nodding, turning the moment into a lesson about assumptions and fairness. Lucas beamed, proud not just of his toy, but of being heard. Across the street, Brenda faced a colder reality. Winter meant fewer distractions, more time alone, and too much space for reflection. She replayed that afternoon again and again, noticing details she had ignored before. Lucas's confusion, Sarah's fear, the office's calm certainty. The moment she realized the law wasn't on her side, each memory chipped away at the story she once told herself. One evening, Brenda received a letter she didn't expect. It was from the city, confirming the completion of her community service and the end of her formal penalties. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt hollow. Punishment had ended, but accountability lingered. There was no document that could restore trust. Snow fell heavier as the weeks passed. Maplewood Lane grew quieter, but warmer in its own way. Neighbors exchanged baked goods, shoveled each other's driveways, and checked in more often. Community, once fragile, now felt intentional. Sarah stood at her window one night, watching Lucas sleep, thinking about how close she'd come to doubting herself that day. One step back, one apology offered too soon, and the outcome might have been very different. Standing firm hadn't just protected her son. It had protected others she might never meet. Brenda watched the same snow from behind her curtains, understanding at last that authority without empathy was just fear wearing a mask. She couldn't undo what she'd done, but the silence forced her to listen to truths she had avoided for years. Winter didn't erase the past. It preserved it, and when spring came, nothing would grow the same way again. Spring returned to Maplewood Lane with cautious optimism, as if the neighborhood itself remembered what had happened and moved forward more thoughtfully. Flowers bloomed along fences, fresh paint brightened porches, and the yard at the center of it all slowly came back to life. The inflatable obstacle course was unpacked, foam blasters reappeared, and laughter once again filled the air, stronger and more confident than before. Sarah noticed how different it felt this time. There was no tension, no watchful eyes waiting to judge. Parents smiled as they walked past. Some even waved, acknowledging that joy didn't need permission. Lucas ran freely, inviting friends, explaining rules, sharing instead of hiding. Childhood reclaimed its rightful space completely. One afternoon, a moment occurred that would have once sparked panic. A loud argument broke out 2 houses down, voices raised, emotions high. Before, someone like Brenda might have rushed in, escalating the situation. Instead, 2 neighbors calmly stepped in, listening first, de-escalating, choosing understanding over authority. The argument ended quietly, resolved through conversation rather than confrontation. Brenda observed this from a distance. She still lived there, still walked the same sidewalks, but she no longer felt entitled to intervene. Watching others handle conflict without control unsettled her, but it also taught her something valuable. Order didn't come from domination. It came from cooperation. One afternoon, Brenda found herself standing near the fence between her yard and Sarah's, separated by a clear boundary she now respected. She considered speaking, apologizing, explaining. But the no-contact order remained, and more importantly, so did her awareness of the harm she'd caused. Some apologies weren't meant to be delivered. Some were meant to be lived. Instead, Brenda turned away and focused on rebuilding herself quietly. She attended workshops required by the court, not out of obligation, but curiosity. Discussions about bias, fear, and power challenged her long-held beliefs. It was uncomfortable. It was necessary. Sarah, unaware of most of this, focused on the present. She watched Lucas grow more confident, more outspoken, more aware of his right to feel safe. The incident had been frightening, but it had also been formative. It taught him that adults could be wrong, and that standing up didn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it meant refusing to step aside. Maplewood Lane stood as proof that one moment of conflict could either fracture a community or force it to grow. This one had done both, and from that fracture, something stronger had formed. One chapter remained. By the time Summer returned to Maplewood Lane, the story that once shook the neighborhood had settled into something quieter, almost symbolic. It was no longer about a woman, a yard, or toys mistaken for threats. It had become a shared lesson, carried subtly in the way people treated one another, in how quickly they chose understanding over accusation. Sarah often thought about that evening when everything changed. Not with fear anymore, but clarity. She understood now how easily peace could be disrupted by certainty without compassion. More importantly, she understood her own strength. She had protected her child, her space, and her dignity without becoming what she stood against. That mattered. Lucas, older and taller now, barely remembered the fear. What stayed with him wasn't the shouting or the sirens, but the feeling of being defended. That knowledge shaped him quietly. He spoke up more. He trusted himself. When someone crossed a line at school, he recognized it for what it was. Not authority, just wrong. The yard remained a place of joy. Toys came and went, seasons changed, but the sense of ownership never faded. It was theirs, and everyone knew it. Boundaries had become visible, not as walls, but as mutual understanding. Brenda never regained what she lost, and perhaps that was the point. Power built on control rarely survives accountability. Over time, she learned to exist without intervening, without monitoring, without inserting herself where she wasn't invited. Growth came slowly, quietly, without applause. Whether she fully changed didn't matter as much as the fact that others no longer paid the price for her certainty. Maplewood Lane continued like any other street, imperfect but awake. People still disagreed. Conflicts still happened, but assumptions were questioned now. Permission was respected, and fear no longer passed for responsibility. Years later, the story would be told in fragments. A viral clip, a neighborhood rumor, a cautionary tale about crossing lines. But those who lived it remembered something deeper. They remembered the moment silence broke, authority failed, and ordinary people chose fairness instead. It was never really about illegal toys. It was about who gets to decide what's allowed in someone else's life. And the answer, finally, was clear. Not fear, not entitlement, not the loudest voice, but respect.